Welcome to 10 for 10, the podcast that delves into 10 modern Israel concepts, each for about 10 minutes. We are Dr. Tal Grinfus David and Dr. Jonathan Golden. And today's episode will ask whether Israel's conceptual frameworks are broken concepts or unifying paradigms. The recent war broke long-time held conceptual frameworks about Israeli security and intelligence, trust and leadership, economic transformation, and society's values. Many Israelis felt like they were living in a concepция shvua, a bubble that had shattered on October 7th, leaving us to ask, what are the essential unifying frameworks in Israeli society? What has stayed the same and what has changed? In the next two episodes, we will continue the conversation by discussing when frameworks need to be rebuilt, reconstructed, which concepts, ideals, or values we should lean on to better understand the reality that Israel is facing and will face in future generations. And in episode 6, we will discuss the frameworks we each use to analyze Israel's past, present, and future. Jonathan, what are some widely held frameworks that you have seen change over time?
One important framework for Israel is the idea of facts on the ground. Zionism included many different ideologies, including political, cultural, religious, and labor Zionism. While all are part of the story of the founding of Israel, it is the practical Zionists who were the key early leaders, including David Ben-Gurion. They stressed ideas including working the land themselves, forestation, and land purchases. They stressed the idea of Yediat Haaretz, meaning knowing the land for themselves by hiking and exploring its diverse landscapes. Herzl is known to have said, Im tirtzu ein zo agada. If you will it, it is no dream. The idea of facts on the ground shaped the notion of making a dream into a reality. Speaking of dreams, in a number of classroom settings, I have shared my dream of what Lin-Manuel Miranda's sequel to Hamilton could be, a musical about pre-state Zionism between David Ben-Gurion and Vladimir Jabotinsky. Just as the musical Hamilton situates the audience in age-old cabinet debate in the room where it happens, that still matter today. The ideologies of Ben-Gurion and Jabotinsky in the 1930s contained frameworks that shaped and continue to shape the evolution of Israel in its response to challenges. Like Hamilton and Jefferson, each figure is an iconic thinker whose words and ideas resonate until today. In the midst of the Great Arab Revolt of 1936, both testified before the Peel Commission in 1937 in its idea of the partition of the British Mandate for Palestine. Well, Ben-Gurion was not in love with the idea of ceding land that he felt should be part of a Jewish state. He saw the great possibility of establishing a state in which the community would strengthen, develop scientific institutions, and benefit the region as a whole. In many ways, Ben-Gurion's testimony in 1937 foreshadows the ideas of startup nation and a new Middle East that were the foundation of Israel's growth in the 1990s. In contrast, Jabotinsky was, in his word, distressed about the fate of the Jewish people in the 1930s and saw the land offered by the Peel Commission to not even come close to what the community needed. He appealed to the notions of normalcy and justice for the Jewish people, to have a home in its land, and to have the iron wall to defend it. His ideas echo through the ages to the positions of the political right, to assert the demands of Israeli security first, and have that be the focus of public policy. In every election that followed the creation of the state, one can hear the rhymes to the words of Ben-Gurion and Jabotinsky and the ideological frameworks that they championed. Tal, which frameworks do you think were important in the early years of independence?
Well, first, I want to emphasize the framework that you raised of facts on the ground matter, and add to that the early Zionists you mentioned were incredibly aware that the dunams they purchased would shape the future state. On December 31st of 1937, Eliyahu Epstein took notes of a meeting in which that leadership discussed the strategic importance of purchasing land with limited funds to secure future borders, to ensure fresh water supplies, to ensure oil import through ports, and to secure the corridor to Jerusalem, knowing full well that more land was being offered for sale by Arabs than they could raise money to buy. So, facts on the ground matter was a foundational framework and one that has continued well into the present with ideas of settlements, annexation of the Golan, disengagement from Gaza, and the status of East Jerusalem. A second framework from Israel's early years has been never again, referring to the Holocaust, and it unified the evolving approach to Israel's national security. Israeli leaders developed a set of guiding strategies, including defense, diplomacy, deterrence, and options for preemptive unilateral action, all in support of this framework never again. These strategies were built on the lessons learned and the experience accumulated by many Jewish defense organizations during the pre-statehood years. It was assumed that because Jews were powerless during the Holocaust, they could not have prevented or even adequately responded to the existential threat of anti-Semitism, and that as a sovereign state with Jewish leadership, such a tragedy would be prevented at all costs. A third framework or unifying concept is Israel as the startup nation, or the little country that can accomplish anything if Israelis can put their minds to it. And this harkens back to Herzl's call that you mentioned, Im Tirtzu en zo agada. If you will it, it's not a dream. Even in this early period, Peres, Rabin, Ben-Gurion, and other leaders understood the need to incentivize innovation, to stay a few steps ahead of imminent threats, and to secure nuclear capabilities for deterrence. The first decade of statehood is also known as the period of austerity, in which citizens were struggling to find housing, adequate basic resources, and jobs that would take them out of poverty, many of whom were new immigrants who left everything behind to flee persecution, either from post-World War II Europe or from Arab countries. In what was then a socialist economy and mindset, food stamps and long lines were common for most households, and people looked out for one another. This exemplified the concept of the oref, which is a reference to the civilians as the nape of the neck, or the most vulnerable part of the body, which means that the strength of the state lies in the responsibility of the collective to take care of its most vulnerable citizens. Israelis acted to resolve the housing crisis within 1 decade, diversified the oil and energy portfolio to combat the Arab boycott by importing from Latin and South America, as well as other sources. And they met the challenges of nearly doubling the population overnight, despite Israel's limited resources. They demonstrated that mindset of willing the state into being and manifesting their vision, despite challenges that would defeat most other nations. Jonathan, how do you think the lack of natural resources in Israel shaped these frameworks?
I think that Israel has had the benefit of great human resources. Golda Meir once quipped that it took Moses 40 years to find the only place in the Middle East with no oil. And that joke hinted at what Israel had been missing. But in many ways, this has proven to be a blessing in disguise. The influx of Jewish immigrants from around the world and their human capital has positioned Israel well for the modern knowledge economy. From branches of key tech companies based in Israel to Israeli startups being bought by major players in the world, Israel is a global center of innovation. Some studies suggest that Israel has the highest number of people with a PhD per capita in the world, and that has fueled advancements in technology, medicine, green technology, and other areas. Paul, besides the economic challenges that Israel had to overcome, what frameworks guided Israel's response to its military challenges?
After the nearly 2 years of war, from 1947 and ending in a ceasefire in 1949, one guiding principle became evident in understanding Israel's military framework. Any conflict must be won quickly and decisively, because the civilian population would not be able to withstand prolonged warfare, and the tiny country could not negotiate terms from a position of weakness. A second principle also guided Israel's leadership, that preemptively attacking an enemy force would likely result in isolation from world allies, which Israel was dependent upon to strengthen its military, bolster its economy, and gain much needed political support in world organizations like the UN. A third principle became clear early on, that any action by the state would have an impact on Jews worldwide, either elevating them with pride, like in the Entebbe operation, or endangering them with increased anti-Semitism, like in creating Jewish settlements in the West Bank. Jonathan, when did frameworks and principles start to shift?
1977 was a year of political revolution when Menachem Begin was elected with the Likud party, and it ushered in a very different era of Israeli policy and politics. One key shift was a move away from socialism and toward economic privatization. While there were economic ups and downs in the 1970s and 1980s, including the creation of a new shekel, much of this era set the foundation for Israel's success as a startup nation in the 1990s and beyond. A second key idea was peace with Egypt through the Camp David Accords, a peace led by Menachem Begin, who was successor to Jabotinsky. While Israel had created settlements as facts on the ground after the Six-Day War, those settlements, including Yamit, needed to be removed in order for peace with Egypt to be possible. This peace with Israel's most populous neighbor was crucial not only from a security and peacemaking perspective, but also for the long-term economic needs of the state. Peace with Egypt paved the way for peace with Jordan in 1994 and moved, at least for a time, for a shift in thinking from the Arab-Israeli conflict to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The Camp David Accords also contained concepts that were applied in the Oslo Accords to pursue a peace process with the Palestinians. While the aftermath of Oslo may leave Israel in a catch-67, in the words of Micha Goodman, of a conflict that cannot be solved, managed, or made smaller, the paradigms of this era still inform much contemporary thinking and will continue to do so until new paradigms are formulated in the aftermath of October 7th. How were frameworks and concepts impacted after October 7th?
Well, the framework of never again that unified Israelis from its first decade was completely broken with the Hamas attack, not only because of its scope and the civilian losses, but also because some of those kidnapped or murdered were themselves Holocaust survivors. It was a gut punch for sure. To date, the war is dragging on. No clear, decisive win has been established, and Israel's hostages do not allow for it to negotiate terms from a place of strength. It is very hard to use a slogan like, never again, to unify the people. It just rings hollow. Any previously held assumptions that peace agreements or even a quiet status quo could be attained by incentivizing the moderates in Iran's proxy organizations proved to be ill-conceived and dangerous, as millions of dollars were ultimately funneled toward the building of tunnels and the arming of terrorism. The hopes of Israelis who sought a two-state solution with coexistence were not borne out, despite the efforts to reach out to the civilian Palestinian population in a variety of programs, governmental and nonprofit. Any assumptions made by Israel's military or intelligence apparatus that deterrence and military superiority would prevent an attack were undermined by October 7th, showing that radical Islam's grip on power would come even at the expense of their own people. Even highly impressive Israeli military and intelligence campaigns like precision strikes against terrorist leaders or the beeper attack on Hezbollah and Israel's air defense systems, including Iron Dome, did not stop repeated attacks on Israeli citizens. So all in all, long-held frameworks of defense, deterrence, and diplomacy became empty shells that need to be reimagined in light of recent events.
Given the brokenness of so many key frameworks, what might the day after look like? And what will be the operational frameworks in the future? Which frameworks or models might provide us with guidance about how to imagine future paradigms? This is a conversation that is only beginning, and we want to think together with you about it in the upcoming episode.
Thank you for listening to Israel's Historical Frameworks, Broken Concepts, or Unifying Paradigms. Please listen to episode 6 for a continuation of this conversation with a forward-looking proposal for frameworks that might endure the test of time. Please visit our websites, heartstance.org and tgdconsulting.org, to download our Family and Educator Guide with links to examples from turning points in history, additional resources, and discussion prompts.